Okay, let's pull out a really dark, dusty, cold case file from 1922 Bavaria. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're not just looking at some dry historical event here. No, we're stepping right into a century-old crime scene that literally reads like a cinematic thriller. We're going to put on our investigator hats and analyze the evidence, the timelines, and the suspects of the Hinterkaifeck farm murders. It's a case that's baffled detectives for over 100 years, and as you'll see, for very good reason. To even begin to understand the deep psychosis at work here, we have to ask ourselves one incredibly chilling question. What kind of person completely slaughters a family of 6 and then comfortably stays for dinner? Seriously, it's that one detail that elevates this from a tragic, isolated rural crime to an absolute masterclass in pure horror. As we go through the facts, keep that question right in the back of your mind, because trust me, the psychology of this unknown attacker, it's just as terrifying as the crime itself.
Section 1. The century-old crime scene.
So, any good investigation starts with establishing the victims, and here we have 3 generations of the Gruber family all living under one roof. There's the patriarch Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and Victoria's 2 young kids, 7-year-old Kazilia and 2-year-old Josef. And then, tragically, there's Maria Baumgartner. She was the brand new maid. Literally, she had just arrived hours earlier. It was her very first day on the job. All 6 of these people were found brutally bludgeoned to death. Now, the autopsies, which were actually conducted right there in the barn by a court physician, revealed the murder weapon was likely a mattock. If you don't know what that is, it's a really heavy agricultural hand tool, mostly used for digging and chopping. And it was used to deliver these devastating, incredibly calculated blows to the victims' heads. But here's what's fascinating from an investigative standpoint. The weapon wasn't immediately found at the scene. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't found for a whole year. It was finally discovered hidden deep beneath the floorboards in the farm's attic when the property was being demolished. Section 2. Footprints in the snow. When we review the timeline of events, it reveals this absolutely terrifying psychological escalation leading up to the attack. Let's go back 6 months prior. The previous maid actually quits because she keeps hearing footsteps in the attic. She felt like she was being watched and genuinely believed the place was haunted. Then, in early March, an unfamiliar newspaper from Munich just magically appears on the isolated property. House keys vanish, a tool shed lock is tampered with, and finally, the day before the murders, Andreas finds footprints in the fresh snow, but they lead out of the forest, directly to the house, and there is 0 footprints leading back. Looking at this timeline, we can clinically deduce there was no ghost. This was a very real predator secretly living in the family's attic, just watching their every single move.
Section 3. 4 Days with the Dead.
The sequence of events that night brilliantly illustrates the cold, calculating nature of this trap. The killer didn't just kick down the front door swinging. No, they likely created some sort of disturbance out in the barn, maybe unsettling the animals. And this lured the 4 older family members out into the dark, one by one. Each person was ambushed, struck down, and their bodies were hastily stacked and covered with hay. Once the perimeter was completely secure, the killer moved into the main house to eliminate the sleeping maid and a 2-year-old toddler right in his bassinet. As an investigator analyzing this file decades later, I have to say, this is easily the most harrowing detail of the entire crime scene. Little 7-year-old Kazilia, she didn't die immediately. The evidence clearly showed she survived for hours in that hay, tearing out tufts of her own hair in shock and complete agony. It proves the attacker was either standing right there in the dark with her or was completely unbothered by her prolonged suffering just a few feet away. It's truly chilling. But here is where the whole thing shifts from a tragic mass murder into a bizarre psychological thriller. Because the killer didn't flee into the night. They stayed for at least 3 days. They fed and cared for the cattle. They sliced meat and casually ate bread from the family's pantry. Neighbors literally saw smoke rising from the chimney because the killer was keeping the house warm. They even left the farm's guard dog completely unharmed. The sheer nerve to slaughter 6 people and then just casually stoke the fire and feed the livestock, that completely rules out a simple robbery. It points to a deeply unsettling level of comfort with the environment.
Section 4. The suspect lineup.
Let's cross-examine our first major suspect, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighboring farmer. Let's look at the motive first. He had a previous relationship with Victoria, a messy paternity dispute over young Josef, and definitely some financial resentment. But honestly, it's his suspicious behavior that really sets off alarm bells. He was the guy who led the search party, and witnesses noted he was completely undisturbed by the mangled bodies in the barn. Like, no reaction. Even more damning, he supposedly unlocked the farmhouse door with a key that the Grubers had reported missing days before the murders. He also moved the bodies around before police arrived, hopelessly contaminating the crime scene. Schlittenbauer's intimate knowledge of the farm definitely makes him a compelling local suspect, but we've got to look at the family's own dark history too.
Impartially speaking, to truly understand the victimology here, we have to talk about the disturbing family dynamics at play. Back in 1915, Andreas and his daughter Victoria were actually convicted in court of an incestuous relationship. So we're talking about a deeply abusive, highly controlling household environment. Plus, Victoria had recently withdrawn a large sum of hoarded family wealth. Now, some investigators have theorized this could be a motive for an internal family annihilation, like maybe Andreas snapped when Victoria tried to finally leave him. But Andreas' own brutal murder alongside the rest of the family makes that theory pretty hard to swallow.
That brings us to two other prominent theories in the file: the drifter versus the dead husband. Post-World War I Germany was completely devastated economically. A desperate vagrant could have easily slipped into that attic, hiding out for 6 months and sustaining himself on the farm's resources before being driven to violence. That perfectly explains the attic noises and why the farm dog didn't bark, right? The dog was used to him. But on the flip side, we have Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel. He reportedly died in the war in 1914, but his body was never actually recovered. Rumors persisted for decades that he survived, came back home, discovered his wife's relationship with her father, and exacted this brutal, methodical revenge before just vanishing into the wind.
Section 5. The Axeman Connection.
Now let's widen our lens a bit. Author Bill James put forward a wildly compelling theory profiling a serial killer he calls the man from the train. If we compare the famous 1912 Villisca axe murders in the U.S. to our Hinterkaifeck case, the modus operandi is practically a mirror image. We're talking about targeting an entire family in an isolated home near railroad tracks, using the blunt side of a farm tool found right on site, covering the bodies and the windows, leaving the cash untouched, and most chillingly, staying in the house afterwards to eat and sleep? James theorizes that a German immigrant named Paul Mueller could have committed the Villisca murders, and when American detectives started closing in, he just fled back to Germany, only to strike again at Hinterkaifeck 10 years later. It's a massive theory, but the parallels are undeniable.
Section 6. A mystery forever unsolved. Fast forward to 2007. Students at the Furstenfeldbruck Police Academy actually reopened this cold case using modern forensic analysis on the surviving files. And in their final report, they dropped a bombshell. They stated that all the authors independently agreed on exactly who the main suspect was. They essentially solved it right there. Yet, because the killer is long dead, and to protect the privacy of his living descendants, they officially sealed the name. So they know who did it, but the public file remains forever closed. How frustrating is that? Which leaves us with this final, incredibly unsettling thought. The footprints in the snow, the missing keys, the smoke rising from the chimney of a house literally filled with the dead. If modern investigators know who did it, who do you think was secretly living in the Gruber family's attic? Was it the jilted, angry neighbor? The vengeful ghost of a thought-to-be-dead soldier, or a drifting serial killer riding the rails across the globe? It's the kind of case that just leaves you looking over your own shoulder, wondering exactly how well you know your neighbors, or what might be hiding right now in your own dark spaces. Thanks for joining me to reopen this explainer file. Keep your eyes open, and I'll catch you next time.